Murad, thank you so much for joining me. This is our Canada Day Tech Special, and we were thinking about the perfect person to speak to about Canada's AI story. This is a theme that has come up time and time again on the AmberMac show. So let's talk about Canada's AI story. We're going to talk about what's happening today, but I wanted to talk historically a little bit about AI's roots in Canada. So take me back to the beginning of some of the work from the godfathers of AI that has taken place in this country.
Yeah, and so this is really sort of a long story that's exploded in the last few years. So going back several decades, I mean, I think you can go back as far as the early 2000s, when a group of researchers in Canada and elsewhere, but quite a lot of them in Canada, were doing this thing called neural networks. And this is a particular way of thinking about both the brain and AI. So uh, the idea is, AI, some form of AI has existed for a long time, but like instead of basically building what you could think of as like an elaborate phone tree, like lots of links and coding. This was meant to work a little bit the way that the brain worked. And at the time, in the early 2000s, this was sort of considered a bit of a rogue branch of computer science and in a way AI. The idea had been around for a long time, but nobody thought it could actually work. And so the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, CFAR, actually funded Jeff Hinton, one of these godfathers, one of these pioneers of AI at U of T, funded a proposal he had to basically set up a network of researchers primarily in Toronto and in Montreal, so Montreal around Joshua Bengio, to work on this stuff. And so between the two of them and their students, they kind of built out this almost like a training tree or a coaching tree of graduates. They'd have a few grad students every year, a few PhD students. They'd all work together. They'd come together in the summers in Montreal or Toronto, sometimes in New York, to share their research and talk about the new advances. But it was kind of all happening in the background. Like people have described this to me in the early years. I believe in the first year that it happened, the summer school happened, there were literally no, it was like literally a windowless room. Not quite a basement, but pretty close. And so over time, this grew and grew and grew a little bit. And then in the early 2010s, there was this major breakthrough called AlexNet. And the idea there was there's this competition run by another pioneer of AI, Fei Li, out of Stanford, to try and categorize images. So, like, what is in this image? What's the best categorization you could do? And three researchers at the University of Toronto, so Jeff Hinton and his students, in Alex Krzhevsky and Ilya Sutskever, who comes up quite a lot now these days in AI around OpenAI, built this tool that could do the categorization better than any AI system out there. People talk about this as the AlexNet moment. And sort of modern AI kind of starts there for some people. These three go off to work for Google. And then years later, Ilya helps found OpenAI. OpenAI gives us ChatGPT, and that gets us to where we are today.
It is really a fascinating history, and it's a history I think that many of us who have worked or reported on tech for a long time are familiar with. But I would also argue that the average Canadian maybe is unfamiliar with these AI roots. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I entirely agree with you. It's funny because a couple of years ago we wrote this series of stories. I wrote several thousand words, somewhat to my editor's chagrin initially, about the history of Canadian AI. And when I did it, I ended up realizing how much of it I had missed at the time. So in 2011, 2012, when AlexNet was happening at U of T, I was actually an undergrad at U of T, like three or four buildings over. I had friends in the engineering department at the time, and I had no idea what was going on. Like it was making some level of global news, but it was making news to a set of people who understood what this could be. And frankly, this is part of the story of AI is it's been around the corner for so long. We talked a lot internally at the Logic, and I just talked to a lot of people over the last couple of years about like what was it about ChatGPT that really like caused this whole moment, right? Because if you were paying attention to AI, you knew stuff was happening. But there's been reporting that says that even OpenAI didn't realize how big ChatGPT was going to be. It was like a little bit of a test that they built. They put it out there. They did not anticipate what it would become. And it's because you and I and everybody who's watching this has probably been using some form of AI for years, like Siri. If you get a parcel from like Canada Post or Purelator or something, there's probably some kind of algorithm that helped direct where that how that parcel ended up at your door, like which van it should go on. Like there's not like somebody, doing the wires or whatever in the back end. But that stuff felt it was kind of invisible, right? Like you didn't really think about it. You only actually really thought about it when like Siri was giving you a bad answer and you were like, what is this? It's the seamlessness of the experience that has brought it into focus. And then you ask the question, who built this and why does this exist? And it turns out the answer involves a lot of Canadians.
Yeah, it is an incredible story of Canadian innovation. Even when you talk about ChatGPT, I was reading recently it's the fifth most popular website today in the world. So in just a few short years, we've seen so many people who are starting to use AI on a regular basis. Even if they used it before, I think they're much more aware that they are using it in some capacity today. We're also seeing in Canada that even though we have these really deep roots in AI research, that the adoption of AI, especially within businesses, is slow. The stats all say the same thing. We're a little bit slower when it comes to adoption and even commercialization compared to other countries around the world. Why do you think that is?
This is a long-standing story that predates AI. I mean, digital technology in general, Canadian businesses are very bad at adopting. I've started saying that more and more explicitly because I think, a lot of the talk around the AI sector has been like, what can the government do to make us more competitive? And the reality is that large Canadian businesses, but particularly small businesses, have been slow to adopt every wave of technology that we've seen. There's a lot of different theories. One of them is simply the concentratedness of the Canadian market. Peter Nicholson, who's a sort of uh, he's as close to as we get to like a rock star industrial economist in Canada, although I imagine he'd hate that phrasing. Is talks about like if you're working in a relatively small market and you don't have a lot of major competition, your incentive to spend money on new technologies is lower. Like you're doing fine making money serving people the way you've always done. So there's not that intensity to like, try something new. That's one set of things. The other set of things is, frankly, these tools are not, it's not clear yet necessarily what these tools are good for or how good they are at it. So there are certain use cases where generative tools have really, like where you talk to people working in those industries and the value has been very clear. So coding is one of them. Speeding up the process of coding, certainly bug checking, that kind of thing. To some degree, customer service. So there are some companies, there's a company in Toronto called Ada, which sort of their modeling suggests that their AI agents are getting close to on par with human agents. In some cases, sort of are on par with human like customer service reps. Everybody says I don't want to talk to a chatbot, and it turns out actually a lot of people are fine with talking to a chatbot as long as it can get stuff done. So it's teaching people what the right use case is and then showing them actual value from it. That's where the gap is right now.
It's interesting too, beyond those announcements, to think about the regulation side of artificial intelligence, because there has been lots of talk, especially as of late, of how we put guardrails around what's happening on the AI front. At the same time, and just link this back to the beginning of our conversation when we talk about one of the godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, he has been doing podcasts, events, really warning people about the dangers of artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to potentially displacing and replacing workers. Do you think that Canada is able to both recognize and realize the opportunity that exists when it comes to AI adoption within government and beyond, but also be a leader when it comes to regulation around AI? Are those things compatible? Because I think governments around the world are trying to figure that out.
Yeah, let me split this into two because I think they're somewhat different. We'll come to the sort of job displacement piece in a second because I think that's really important and sort of under focused on in this. On the pure regulation, like what should companies be able to build and do with the technology? The G7 was a really interesting moment for this. So again, not to take you back too far, but in 2023, I was in Milton Keynes, it's a small town outside of London, for the AI Safety Summit, the British AI Safety Summit, which came at this moment. It came shortly after ChatGPT, shortly after Jeff Hinton had left Google, and shortly after Jeff Hinton and Joshua Bengio had both started talking publicly and frequently about their concerns about the dangers of AI. Now, in that moment, a lot of the talk, a lot of the coverage, even, and frankly, quite a lot of what both of them were saying was about existential risk, the idea that humanity might be in danger because of this. But that sort of fit into this broader thing of like there was a lot of focus on regulation, governance, safety. These were kind of the words of the moment. And that same year, the G7's AI statement, not that they do one every year, but that year in Japan, there was an AI statement that focused on governance and responsible use of AI. Now, fast forward to this year, we have the successor summit to the Bletchley Park Summit in France. Um, that one is very much focused on adoption. This statement is very much focused on adoption. We've had the new Canadian AI minister, Evan Solomon, uh, talking about, possibly suggesting that the Canadian government, that Canada might have over-indexed on warnings and regulation in the past, saying not, and I want to be clear here, he said, there is a place for regulation, we do need regulation, but one of the things he said was the US and China will not stomach or will not countenance any restrictions that hold back their industries. So it's kind of futile for Canada to try and go it alone. So that is a tone shift, and it's kind of hard to pin down a little bit. But I think tone matters when you're talking about regulation and what companies are attempting. That's one side of things. On the skills, on the job displacement side, this is, I think, the sort of coming frontier of AI conversation and regulation. You've started to see people like Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei talking about this, like low-level jobs. And my a colleague of mine, Catherine, actually wrote the story recently about low-level jobs being displaced by AI because companies have decided that they don't need sort of entry-level work. Now, will they change their minds eventually about that? That remains to be seen. But all this is a long way of saying, there was a big package of funding in the last federal budget that we had, which was last year's federal budget for AI, and most of it was spent on cloud infrastructure, compute. There was some money in there for skills and like retraining, but it was, that number starts with an M and not a B. Like we're talking about significant differences. So I think that is the next sort of frontier of conversation about this.
So let's talk about that as we wrap up the conversation in terms of the future of AI in Canada. Because when we think about the future of work, the future of small and medium sized businesses, these are audiences that I speak to on a regular basis when I'm talking about AI and keynoting. And I would say that largely they are fearful of this next wave of technology. And I would say even underskilled and unprepared a little bit. How do we actually improve that? Because I don't think Canada can necessarily be a leader on the AI front if we don't more seriously recognize this issue that we're facing right now, and maybe that investment goes from a number with an M to a number with a B in front of it, because we do have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I think everybody is struggling with this at the moment. I think it starts to like uh, raise some fundamental questions about like the nature of work or the nature of like school, right? Like as if kids haven't been through enough in the last few years of the pandemic. Now they're emerging into a world where like what are the jobs? What are the skills that they're going to need to do those jobs? It used to be, my dad always said, you go to university not to like learn stuff. You go to university to learn how to learn stuff, to learn how to think, not specific bits of information. I have an arts education, so take that for what that's worth. But I do think you get into these questions of like, can an can an ordinary person take retrain themselves to have this kind of skills. And the quick analogy I draw is it's funny, right? Because generative AI has switched the focus of what's going to get automated. Like it used to be that we would talk about basically robotics is what we were talking about, factory work, manual work. And now we're talking really mostly about what might be called knowledge work or like information-based work being automated by these systems. But they used to talk about long haul trucking, like really difficult job. How do you convince new people to join the long haul trucking business if everyone's saying it's going to be automated away in 10 years? Why would anyone new join that industry? And we're at that moment of inflection where it's like why would anyone train to do a job that might be automated in a few years? But like if they doesn't get automated in a few years, then we lose all of that capability. So I don't have any answers. I have a lot of questions.
I have a lot of questions as well. It seems like we certainly have a lot of work to do on the AI front to imagine Canada, I think, as a leader in this space beyond just research. I know you do a lot of work writing about AI in Canada. So for people who want to follow you, where's the best place to go?
Thelogic.co. We There's a lot going on there, more than I can keep track of these days. But yeah, that's where my stuff is.
Well, I'm hopeful that our jobs won't get automated away. So hopefully we can chat again in the future.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.